Exhibit B. According to the Sikha of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Chelach Haftes of the Kudu Sikhas, Shabbos Chazayin, Exhibit A is a piece of clothing, your standard issue white cotton t-shirt, shrinks in the wash, the whole thing. This is a levush. Levush.
Oh, levush bodies.
Levush means a piece of clothing. This is a bias. Bias means a house. Now, the Beis Hamikdash, Havisha and Vasheni, the first two Batei Mikdashes are like a house. Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi is like a levush. What's the connection? They're both things that express the person that's invested within them. Both the person's house and the person's clothing reflect the person. The person's house reflects the person in a general way. By looking at the person's house, you figure out whether it's a rich person or a poor person. You can figure out their tastes in general. But the actual person could be anyone, ranging from a little old lady to a big young man. So it could be anyone who lives in the house. The levush, piece of clothing, is directly proportional. All of its dimensions in every way fit the person that wears it. So therefore, in a way, by looking at the piece of clothing that's tailor-made, that fits to the person, you can actually see the person in the clothing because all of the person's dimensions, everything about them, fits in the clothing. Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, first about the Mikdashos, were built by the hands of man. It's an example of a person taking something in the world and using it for holiness. They would take materials, they took physical materials, physical stones, gold, tapestries, whatever was used, and they made it into a house of God. They made it into Hashem's specifications in the correct place, in the correct shape. And the dimensions of the first two Batei Mikdashes were directly correspondent to the kedusha that was invested within them. That's why it was a house of God, because the actual dimensions of the building itself and all the kelim inside directly corresponded to the different levels of kedusha, the different levels of godliness and holiness which were invested within the Beis Hamikdash. Third Beis Hamikdash is like a piece of clothing. It's not made by the hands of man. It's going to be made by God, and therefore, in a certain sense, it's going to be perfect. Not only is its dimensions going to match the dimensions of godliness in a general way, like a house, but it's actually going to be a levush for godliness. In other words, when you see the third Beis Hamikdash, you will see in those dimensions, you will see godliness in that physicality itself. You'll see godliness in all of its dimensions, so to speak. You'll see Elokus in all of its dimensions as it's expressed in this third Beis Hamikdash directly. The same way you can see a person by looking at his clothes, you will be able to see God by looking at the third Beis Hamikdash. This effect, because all of the ruchnius of the world is dictated by the Beis Hamikdash of the world at the time. Therefore, this affects everything in Mashiach's time. We know that the dimensions, the aspects of everything in our world comes from ruchnius. The sweetness of an apple comes from chesed atzilus. A lion comes from the face of a lion on the merkava. All dimensions of physicality have a certain ruchniistic source, and the differences between everything really break down to, as is explained in Shari Yichud Emunah and Tanya, the differences of the letters that were said in the Asara Memoris and their tzmuras and their filufim, and all these things, the different letters that are used to create each and every creation, and if they use different letters, they have differences between them. So a table is a table because it's called shulchan, right? And a chair is a chair because it's called kisei, and the letters are different. So too the Metzias is different, the spiritual source is different, and that expresses itself differently as it comes down in physicality. That's how everything is now. When Mashiach comes, the vart of the levush is that in everything in the world, not just in the Beis Hamikdash, we said before the Beis Hamikdash is going to be like a levush, but everything in the world also is also going to, through that third Beis Hamikdash, is going to have that aspect. It's going to express itself in a way of levush and not in a way of bias. You're going to be able to look at the thing and see its spiritual source. You're going to see the Osius that coming down and making the thing. When you look at it at a table, you'll see clearly that a table is a shulchan and not a kiseh. That it starts with a shin and not with a chaf, because you'll see godliness as it's mislavish in the thing. The very dimensions of every physical object will reflect the godliness within. So you really won't see gashmias at all, at least not in the way we see it now. You're going to see every aspect of everything. The fact that a table has a flat surface and a chair has a flat surface and a back, that very aspect of the thing, you're going to see not as a technical aspect of physical reality. You're going to see it as an essential aspect of the object as it derives from godliness. What's the practical here? The Rebbe says This whole sikha is based on the fact that the Levi Yitzchak Raditchev says that on Shabbos Chazayin, the Shabbos that just passed, Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, we're shown the third Beis Hamikdash in a vision, and when we're shown the third Beis Hamikdash, we're shown it as a levush, we're shown it as a piece of clothing. And the reason why in the mashal the father shows the piece of clothing to his child is because in the Nimshal Hashem shows us this vision, or at least in a way of Mazlayu Chazi, he shows our neshama, the third Beis Hamikdash in a way of levush, in order to straighten out our behavior, in order to behave correctly. What's he teaching us by showing us a levush? In other words, he's not just showing us the third Beis Hamikdash, he's specifically showing us this difference. He's saying, don't do this, do this. What does that mean? A person's Avodas Hashem, a person could do all of Torah and mitzvahs. A person could even have Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. He could even have love and fear, but he's doing it in a way of bias and not in a way of a levush. In other words, he's building the Beis Hamikdash, he's doing the right things. The service of Hashem is exactly according to specifications. He does what God says. That would be the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. But ultimately, what's he doing? He's taking materials that are available to him, and he's building a building by the hands of man. In other words, he's going milamata lamaila. He takes, for example, the love that he has of the world. He has a love of Elam Hazeh naturally, and he takes that love and he uses it to love Hashem. The most he's ever going to have is a bias. But he's never going to have a levush, because as we explained before, the bias which comes from what comes from the hand of man, the avodah of lamata lamaila, of taking something which is yours and using and making it into a kli for godliness, is never going to be a perfect kli. It's only going to be a kli that fits in the way of a bias. It has a technical connection to God because this is what God wants, but you're not going to see in every detail of your avodah, you're not going to see godliness expressed there. When you look at a person who wraps tefillin, you're going to see he took physical leather and he took physical ink and physical parchment and he wrapped it on his arm. And now it's a godly thing, it's a holy thing. Godliness is expressed there. But how is godliness expressed there? When you look at someone wrapping tefillin nowadays, what do you see there? You don't see God, you see a pair of tefillin. But the pair of tefillin is being used for a godly purpose. In other words, it's a bias. You took physical objects, you made a house, and you used for a godly purpose. How do we bring Moshiach? We have to do an avodah of levush, not an avodah of bias. What's the avodah of levush? Levush means, in the first place, I'm not using any worldly things and making it into a keli for God. All that exists in the first place is godliness. All that exists to start with is godliness. God builds His own house. We have to do an avodah, so to speak, of lamaila lamata. When we wrap tefillin, it can't be that we're taking something physical and using it in the service of godliness. We have to understand, we have to deher how the physicality itself that we're using is itself godly. In the first place, the world doesn't exist. In the first place, the world doesn't exist. And if it does happen to exist, the only reason why it exists is to be used for this very purpose, is to be used for godliness. The whole thing has no existence of its own in the first place, just like the third Beis Hamikdash, just like the whole purpose of the levush is only to express aspects of godliness, so too our Avodas Hashem, through Emir Hashem, with the help inspired through Chassidus, can be in a way that Milechatchila, nothing we do in this world has its own purpose, nothing in this world has its own separate identity. It's only to be used for Avodas Hashem. That's the point of the existence of the world Milechatchila. It has no separate existence. So through the Aveda in a way of levush, Emir Hashem will be Zeicha to the third Beis Hamikdash also in a way of levush.
Amen. Guys, we're going to say Lo L'chaim.